first big animals to fly. But their bodies were so bizarre, it's hard to imagine how they got into the air. They were pterosaurs, and they owned the skies for 150 million years.
I'm blown away by these animals.
Pterosaurs are probably the weirdest animals that live on this world.
They are the closest things to living dragons the planet has ever seen. They're not birds, and they're not bats. So what in God's name are they?
They're impossible animals. They're reptiles, and yet they're flying around. How on earth could these animals ever fly?
And can they fly again? Now, join the quest to build one. Hunt for evidence that unlocks the mystery of their flight. Piece together clues that may lead to the largest creature that ever flew. Come face to face with the monsters of the sky. 100 million years ago, Earth is a world where strange monsters swim and roam. The planet is in the grip of giant reptiles. And the ancient game of hunt and kill plays out on a scale we wouldn't even recognize. But there is another dimension to this world, often overlooked but more remarkable. It's the realm of the most mysterious creature of them all. Pterosaurs. Flying reptiles, some bristling with teeth. After insects, pterosaurs were the first animals to fly. They became a global air force. Pterosaurs appear abruptly in the fossil record 220 million years ago. We don't have a clue about how they evolved. We do know that after they arrive, they spread around the globe, undergoing some of the strangest costume changes in the history of life. Some had short tails, others long. Some were as small as a sparrow. Others were giants. Many were covered with something like hair and sported crests as if out of Mardi Gras. They had outrageous jaws, fine-tuned for hunting. But for all their variety, it's flight that defined them. Somehow, these long-necked, gawky creatures not only figured it out, they perfected it. 220 million years ago, this skill set them apart from every other large creature. Birds didn't even exist yet. Pterosaurs ruled the skies. We're only just beginning to solve the mysteries of their reign. What was it like in the world of pterosaurs? How big do they really get? how does an animal that looks like a broken umbrella get its ungainly body into the air and actually fly?
Hi, guys.
Hey, Margot.
Led by Dutch engineer and Stanford professor Margot Gerritsen, a team will try to build a model, a lifelike flapping pterosaur that can actually fly. And there are instructions for building a pterosaur. They're written in stone.
You have to get everything from the fossil record. So it's fascinating to try to put it all together like one big puzzle.
It was a beautiful design, something that's extremely hard to duplicate. Gonna be real challenging, Paul, because if you...
To figure out how pterosaurs flew, we will have to understand the strength of their bones and how they moved. The shape and construction of their wings, and how they flapped to create lift and thrust to power their flight. The Stanford model is at an early stage, more airplane than animal, but it will become realistic. As the team first builds it,
5, 4,
and then tries to keep it in the air,
2, 1. Here we go.
their goal is to solve one problem. What are the flight secrets of the first large animal to take to the skies? We used to think that birds and bats were the only big flyers in the skies. But a strange discovery near Solnhofen, Germany, shattered this myth. This limestone quarry is a huge evidence locker, loaded with clues about life in a shallow lagoon 150 million years ago. Less than 250 years ago, a quarryman found something baffling. What was it? Naturalists of the 1700s fumbled for explanations based on familiar creatures. Some thought it was a type of duck. Others believed it was a kind of bat. Yet others saw the wings as good for swimming underwater. But the fossil defied them. It was unlike anything ever collected before. At the Natural History Museum in Paris, Philippe Taquet walks in the footsteps of the man who finally unraveled the mystery. That sleuth was Georges Cuvier. He was the first to figure out that animals had gone extinct. He was the first to understand what dinosaurs were. And here, 2 centuries ago, he applied his forensic eye to the German fossil and blew the case wide open.
Cuvier received a drawing of this strange petrified animal, and he realized suddenly that it was completely a new order of animal.
It was a new branch on the tree of life. Cuvier spotted a tiny bone in the jaw that's like those found in only one kind of animal. Somehow, the weird winged creature was a reptile. What was a reptile doing in the sky?
You have a reptile flying. This was completely surprising.
How could a cold-blooded, lethargic beast like a crocodile launch its bulk into the air? Cuvier found the answer in the hand. A single finger had grown enormously.
And Cuvier said, I will call this animal the pterodactyl. That means the wing on the finger. It was a revolution in zoology.
Cuvier could only imagine what it looked like when it took to the air. For 200 years, we've known that pterosaurs flew, but only recently have we started to figure out how. It's easy to overlook what an incredible amount of skill it takes to fly. To get answers about how pterosaurs did it, take a look at the wings of birds and bats.
All flying animals use the bones of the hands and fingers to fly, but they do it in different ways. Birds have lost the fourth and fifth fingers. They take the first three fingers, and these form the supports for the feathers.
In bats, it's a different story. The four fingers stretch and control the membrane, while the thumb is free. With pterosaurs, the pinky is lost, and the ring finger is stretched dramatically. That's the signature weirdness of pterosaurs, a mega finger that supports the entire wing.
You see an animal that is like nothing else you've ever seen. It's the most bizarre, ungainly, beautiful creature. I mean, it's flying with a finger.
Evidence of that finger is elusive.
Pterosaur fossils are extremely fragile. It's very rare to get a beautiful specimen of a pterosaur.
Nevertheless, he did it. A few years ago, on an expedition to Africa, Serino found a pterosaur where no one expected it.
It's a pterosaur bone, probably a wing bone. The sandstone's missing this end, but this end. Pterosaurs are virtually unknown from Africa. There were just bits and pieces recorded, and it really was an incredible discovery.
Before this expedition, major pterosaur discoveries had come from Europe, China, and the Americas.
The discovery of our African pterosaur showed they had a global reach. They truly conquered every continent.
When Serino found his pterosaur, he also found fossils of a heavyweight predator called supercroc.
This is Sarcosuchus, the giant crocodile of...
Its jaw alone measured nearly 2 meters.
One huge skull.
Did pterosaurs clash with this giant? Each may have hit where the other was weakest. Pterosaurs may have gone for easy pickings in the supercroc's nest. And the croc probably attacked when the awkward pterosaurs were on the ground. Investigators recently unearthed evidence of a similar conflict, the first ever discovered. A fossil find in Canada may show that pterosaurs tangled with dinosaurs. Dinosaur Provincial Park was once a North American Serengeti. Here, pterosaurs tried to stay clear of danger on the ground. But they had to eat, and that meant landing. Eons later, a fossil hunter found hints of what may have been one pterosaur's last landing.
I walked around a corner and took a couple more steps and looked down, and there was this long, skinny bone. And I'm like, this is interesting.
Interesting because it was part of a pterosaur's megafinger. And fragile pterosaur fossils don't last long in the open air. Not only that, the first bone led to several more, and then to a kind of smoking gun. A tooth from something like a velociraptor sunk to the hilt in the pterosaur's shin. What happened? Below the pterosaurs, raptors were constantly on the hunt. On the ground, pterosaurs were vulnerable. Their power was in the air. Flying was their ultimate survival tool.
Pterosaurs dominated the skies, and they did this for 140 million years, which is a tremendously long period of time. Primarily they did this because they were the first to get into the skies.
Before birds evolved, pterosaurs had the skies to themselves for 70 million years. They spread across the globe and morphed into a wild variety of forms. Aside from the power of flight, they had another thing in common.
Pterosaurs were incredibly effective predators. They could gobble up almost anything they could find.
Their jaws tell the story of what they ate.
We know of a lot of pterosaurs have no teeth in their jaws. It's quite possible that they were scavengers, and perhaps in some cases they fed on the bodies of dead dinosaurs.
Many pterosaurs were aggressive hunters. Some were able to snag their fish on the wing.
These big, long, sharp-pointed teeth basically are the tools of a fish catcher who wants to make darn sure that he grabs his prey when he sticks his beak into the water.
One kind of pterosaur used a sieve of 1,000 teeth to strain for crustaceans.
Other pterosaurs have long, sharp-pointed jaws which they use to lever shellfish off rocks or pluck them out of the sand.
For all their variety of feeding techniques, pterosaurs were often found by water, shorelines, rivers, and lakes. And water wasn't just a place to eat, it was also a place to be eaten. Tylosaurs, giant marine reptiles up to 15 meters long, lived in prehistoric seas. Above them flew the nyctosaur, Its freakish meter-high head crest, as big as its wing, may have supported a kind of sail. To find prey, the nyctosaur had to fly low. For every pterosaur ambushed from below, many more spread across the globe. The 5-meter African pterosaur cast its shadow on duckbills. It cruised over prehistoric turtles. And with every skimming flight over water, it risked being torn from the sky. To avoid that fate, pterosaurs could not only fly, they could fly well, even at low altitudes. We have evidence of these aerial skills, and not from a new fossil wing, but from ancient tracks preserved in stone. No one ever thought that pterosaurs were skilled flyers. Their clunky bodies seemed to prohibit anything but gliding. But near Toulouse, France, a new piece of evidence has trashed this myth. 2 investigators examined the rarest of pterosaur fossils. Not petrified bones, but fossilized footprints.
It's a unique site in the world. This is the first site that actually preserves pterosaur tracks that everyone agrees are pterosaur tracks.
One set of footprints here is as vivid to trained eyes as a series of flash photographs. It's the only known record of a pterosaur landing. And how a flyer lands reveals how well it controls its flight. The trackway of this pterosaur reveals extraordinary flight control. It touched down slowly.
We're going to see the animal land like that with the claws this way. So he's landing here and moving forward like that. Then landing again in these tracks here, these 2 footprints. And then for the first time, the hands come in and they land there.
Weirdly, pterosaurs have hands halfway down their wings. While standing, they bend their megafingers up and back. This trackway reveals a key fact about pterosaur flight. They didn't make a running landing as many birds do. They slowed themselves down during final approach.
So there's basically 2 ways it can do that. It can glide down, stall with its wings, and drop. Or it can come down, flap its wings to slow its descent, and land very gently. We're not exactly sure how pterosaurs did it, but it looks like they were pretty capable of flapping their wings to slow down like that.
So pterosaurs used their wings as brakes. They weren't clumsy flyers after all.
These are animals that flew very well and were very adept in the air.
The unique landing track also helped solve another mystery: how pterosaurs walked. On 2 legs, like a bird? on four legs, like a bat? Or did they scoot on their bellies, like penguins?
Because their forelimbs were so long and their hind limbs were shaped so much like birds, I reasoned that they probably would have only walked on two legs, their back legs. But in fact, these tracks showed that they did walk on four legs. You're wrong all the time in science, that's all right.
Monster of monsters, big as a skyscraper.
Ever since we figured out what pterosaurs were, they've been living large in our imaginations.
Look out! They've seen us!
But one man was more obsessed than most. Aeronautical engineer Paul McCready. He's known for inventing weird flyers like the Gossamer Albatross, the first human-powered craft to fly across the English Channel. Captivated by pterosaurs, McCready set out in the 1980s to make the giant, Kets, fly again. His team's biggest challenge was flight control, especially figuring out how to steer. Fossil expert Kevin Padian advised the project.
They thought it really had to have a tail, and it didn't have a tail. But instead, they were very clever. This animal had a very long neck. So they used the neck as the way to balance and steer the animal.
But that's not how real pterosaurs did it. And even with this compromise, sometimes it crashed.
To get it off the ground, get it up in the air. It was fantastic at the time.
We now know pterosaurs mostly relied on their incredibly sophisticated wings for steering. McCready's wings weren't up to the task. They were an unlifelike, rigid carbon fiber. His solution to flight control was aeronautical. He created an airplane in pterosaurs' clothing. Gerritsen, on the other hand, aims for a lifelike pterosaur that steers like the real thing.
Really what's helping us most is that we know a lot more about pterosaurs. Because lots of fossils have been found, we know much more about how they were built.
Take the head. Fossil evidence shows that pterosaurs like this flew with their heads angled down, not parallel to the ground as McCready's model did. A lowered head makes flight far more difficult to control. But that's how real pterosaurs did it. Weight is another challenge. Power to weight is the ratio that governs all flight. And here the model has another advantage: new super light components.
The batteries are a lot lighter and very powerful, and that's helping us a lot.
The batteries hold 15 times as much juice per kilogram as McCready's did. The servo motors are far smaller, lighter, and more powerful. But the biggest difference is the wing. The goal is to solve the steering problem by copying the complexity of a real pterosaur's wing. McCready's wing had only a single moving joint, the shoulder. This wing has 5 joints. At a runway for remote-controlled aircraft, the model's wings are about to be tested. At this stage, though, the model is only part pterosaur. It still needs an airplane tail to steer, and it uses a propeller for takeoff. It may look crude, but it boasts one of the most sophisticated wings ever built. Based on clues from pterosaur fossils, there are 5 movable joints inside the wing for steering. The shoulders rotate. They can also sweep forward and back. The wrists can also rotate and sweep, and the wing can bend at the elbow. Now the object is to experiment with them.
That's the one thing that we're trying to figure out with this replica right now. Which of the joint motions are really critical for control?
The answer was wired into the real pterosaur's brain. So Luvaro will have his work cut out for him.
It is a challenge. It's certainly like flying a ball, and you got to keep on balancing on top of the ball.
Okay, here we go.
That's amazing!
Oh well.
Luvaro couldn't react quickly enough to keep the model in the air.
I would have loved to make it all the way around, but I think we need to do a little more work.
Oh my goodness.
Still, it's a breakthrough. Never before has such an adjustable, lifelike pterosaur wing flown.
Something's loose here. I think we popped the elbow.
Pterosaurs don't give up their secrets easily. A fundamental fact about these outrageous flyers still eludes us. Were pterosaur babies born live, like some snakes or lizards, or did they hatch from eggs? This question was answered only recently. In China, 2 paleontologists uncovered a fossil of a tiny, curled-up pterosaur. It was a pterosaur chick inside an egg.
The discovery of the egg was probably the find of the century, because this tells us something about pterosaurs, about how they reproduced, of which we had absolutely no information before. It was pure speculation, and suddenly here we have an egg.
But we don't yet know when young pterosaurs could fly. Dave Unwin has a controversial theory. Evidence shows that many baby pterosaurs died far from the nest.
We find the fossil remains of these individuals miles out at sea. And the only way they could get there is if they were actually flying animals and they got caught in a storm, ended up dead in the water, and were buried in the sediments at the bottom.
Could pterosaurs have flown right after hatching? Newborn birds and bats can't because they're awkwardly proportioned. To prove his hunch that pterosaurs could take wing right after birth, Unwin needs more evidence. So he's assembled a rare series of fossils, the same kind of pterosaur at 3 different ages. He measures the length of the bones that make up the arm, then those of the megafinger. Unwin finds that the arm and the megafinger grow at the same rate. so the proportions of the wing don't change at all. As a check, he measures bones that have nothing to do with flying, like the beak. These proportions change, so only the flight-critical bones keep the same ratio. The evidence about pterosaur hatchlings now comes together.
They have all their forelimbs, they have their wing membranes. These tiny little pterosaurs could fly.
The model is nearly ready for its next flight test. But its body isn't finished evolving.
It looks so real.
After its makeover, the replica is so lifelike that it's given a name, Herky, short for Hercules. And now Herky gets an accessory. It's something real pterosaurs never evolved or needed, a parachute. Pterosaurs were also known for weird head crests. This metal one is part of a system to keep the head pointed into the wind, as real pterosaurs likely did in the air. For this crucial test, a large remote-controlled airplane will carry Herky aloft and then drop it.
You want to check it?
This is going to be our first flight with fur on the wings. It could go unstable, but I think in generally we're going to be quite all right with it. This is close to being the weirdest thing I've ever flown.
Herky must rely on Michael Luvara's reflexes. A real pterosaur had a big advantage, a flight computer, its brain. A new discovery suggests that its brain could make precise micro-adjustments of the wing many times a second. In a major breakthrough, recent X-ray scans of their skulls revealed faint imprints of pterosaur brains. Pterosaurs had huge balance organs that were able to measure tiny changes in pitch, yaw, and roll. A large part of the brain helped keep the pterosaur's eyes steady during quick maneuvers, a critical skill for hunting. Controlling flight also requires gathering data from the wing as well as from the arm and leg joints that keep the membrane taut. This information was analyzed by another processor that was the core of the flight computer. With Luvara filling in for Herky's brain and a second pilot controlling the mothership, a gliding test of Herky's lifelike wing begins.
Altitude! Okay, one more lap.
The pterosaur will be released at a height of over 200 meters.
Okay, countdown to launch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now.
The drop is clean. The next step is critical. The head, pointing straight ahead for takeoff, must be angled down into the realistic position.
800.
But now Herky pitches down. Luvara tries to release the parachute. It doesn't respond.
Didn't have enough control.
Why did that parachute not come up?
They thought they'd copied every detail, down to the hair on the wings. So what went wrong? Herky was built in 1 year, but it took nature millions of years to perfect real pterosaurs. That's because flight is one of the toughest skills an animal can master. Herky and his kind didn't survive for millions of years just by gliding. They had to flap their wings. How did they do it? The answer again comes from birds and bats. They're the only two large animals alive today that can carry out a special wing motion that keeps them in the air. It's called the flight stroke.
If you want to get up in the air, you have to do a certain kind of motion with your arms. And you can't just flap like this, it doesn't work. It actually requires a stroke that's down and forward, up and back, down and forward, up and back.
Pumping wings at high power for a long time is something only warm-blooded creatures like birds and bats can do. They have a racing metabolism, a V8 engine.
Taking to the air requires a lot of energy, and it requires sustained energy. If you want to stay up in the air, for safety's sake, you better be able to have a good energy reserve. Otherwise, you run out of gas and fall down in the middle of a big flight. It's not good for you.
But pterosaurs were reptiles, and all living reptiles are cold-blooded. Were pterosaurs warm-blooded reptiles? There's a convincing clue. It's a fossil of a pterosaur that had fur not only on the wings, but also on the body. Discovered recently in Inner Mongolia, it comes from an animal with a big motor. Only a warm-blooded beast needs fur to conserve heat.
They're burning energy like mad, and they're able to burn that energy in bursts when they really need to. Something about that kind of lifestyle requires a physiology like a bird that is burning fast and hot. Maybe pterosaurs would have felt warm if you touched one. They were everything but like today's reptiles.
A pterosaur needs one more feature to execute the flight stroke.
The flapping takes a lot of power. And there's a big wings, and it's flying at high speed. So we need a big motor.
But the motor adds weight. An analysis of the last flight showed Herky was already heavy and descended too fast. Why?
All this cosmetics that we put on actually took us back in flight ability.
So to fly more like a real pterosaur, Herky has to look less like one. Shaved and in fighting trim, Herky evolves from glider to flapper. Herky's been worked over, crash-tested, and refined. He's as close to a real pterosaur as the team can make him. But is he close enough? On a wing finger and a prayer, Herky takes off for the last time.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
Now it's time to flap. After a single flight stroke, the wings jam. Herky's engine is too weak. He can't even get his wings back to level. Lavara bails out.
It worked.
About 50 feet, 40, 20, touchdown.
Well, it doesn't look too bad. The parachute saved us. I think we lost our clutch and gearing.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, look at that. That's why it didn't flap.
I think we were spinning the motor with nothing. Yeah, the whole clutch system came apart. How about that?
Oh, that explains a lot.
Well,
It turns out that Herky was a runt.
yeah.
Later calculations revealed that his flapping motor had only half the power a real pterosaur would have had. Still, Herky's wings helped rewrite the book on pterosaur flight.
I'm really proud of the design of the wings. We built a wing that behaves beautifully in gliding flight. We can control the shape, and by controlling it, we can steer the pterosaur. So that's been fantastic.
But the real animals set an almost impossibly high standard. It was only by building Herky that we figured out just how skilled they were. They had the right stuff for flight, and they used it to conquer the globe. Tenacious hunters, they adapted to different diets. Filtering, probing, scavenging, and in a tour de force of flight control, grabbing fish on the wing.
They were quite amazing. Compared to every living animal that I know, every living flyer or man-made flyer, I think the pterosaurs beat them all.
After ruling the skies for 150 million years, the sky monsters and the planet suffer a calamity. An asteroid strikes the Earth. By one theory, the aftermath wipes out the dinosaurs. The monstrous marine reptiles disappear too. And pterosaurs, master flyers, are gone forever. The skies are left to the birds and the bats. But for all their majesty, they'll never match the grandeur and weirdness of the greatest creatures to ever take wing.
Dragons, of course, are fantastical creatures. Jaws full of teeth, huge wings. These, of course, are myths, never existed. But there were creatures who had all this. They were huge, they had big teeth, they had claws, and they were the pterosaurs.